Hey everybody, welcome to the weekend. It is Left is Law. I want to thank everybody for checking out the Venezuela video. We actually doubled our sub count on that video, so that's a really exciting start. And I really want to give a shout out to the right for continuing to pay attention to these videos. I seem to get more attention from them than anybody. That's usually a good sign. In fact, I got a new insult on my last video, which was soy boy. That's actually one that I've never heard before. So, shout out. This is Resident Soy Boy giving you the deeds. So, today I want to talk about Ben Shapiro, and the alt right hero has kind of finally fallen from grace. I'm going to start by just talking about him in generally before I talk about the interview specifically. I really liked this tweet from Jordan Ewell. I'll try to link it below. He said Ben Shapiro has been doing windmill dunks on a Fisher Price hoop, and everybody in the media was convinced that meant he was an all star. The nanosecond that BBC raises the rim by a foot, he loses his shit, calls it unfair, and storms out. And I think that that's what you've seen with a lot of these guys for a long time. When they're not on their own platform for an hour at a time, they usually go to places where they can probably pretty easily beat up the crowd. Ben Shapiro literally picks on people under the age of 18 who he himself categorizes as having mental illnesses, but at the very least have a lot going on emotionally and a microphone for 10 seconds in their hand to battle him. Same thing with Steven Crowder, who goes and does these change my mind segments where he shifts the terms of the debate and he debates with undergraduates. Like, these people are absolutely punching down. Uh, you find a lot of undergraduate sheep, admittedly, on both sides of the aisle who know what they believe principally because they can stand up for what's right, but not always how to explain it or to debate it. So you won't always see these guys debate people who really know what they're talking about. And if you pick somebody who's read half of Ben Shapiro's book and have him interviewed, he all of a sudden gets whooped. Let's get into some specifics. So I'm just going to go straight chronologically through the video. So the first thing that the BBC reporter starts talking about is he says that we're going to the dark ages with the miscarriage and murder law. And this is something that I think has been super missed on the conversation about the Georgia law. Forget for a second the entire conversation about the heartbeat bill and just look into some of the specific details of it. The two that I found really alarming are the ones that he brings up. Not only does he say that you can have a woman put away for 30 years for a miscarriage, but one thing he doesn't even bring up is that the means of accomplishing that are that women who have miscarriages can literally be interrogated by the state. I don't know in what world that seems like a good idea or acceptable or not morally reprehensible. And I tell you, conservatives are just shooting themselves in the foot. The other part of the law is that women who travel outside of the state can also be charged with second-degree murder, so that they don't have an option to just leave the state and get an abortion. So when the reporter says this, you can watch Ben physically wince at having to deal with this question. He knows that there isn't a good answer to it. He knows that he's going to get couched into defending things that are literally indefensible. It's not about defending the pro-life, pro-choice position. There are legitimate ground on both sides of that debate, but there is no ground on we should interrogate women who have miscarriages. And so what does Ben do? Instead of just owning up to this and having to take a position outside of his conservative hack position, he immediately diverts and deflects. He starts asking, well, I'll answer your question, but well, what about the barbaricness of, third trimester abortions? And you called half the aisle barbaric. He didn't do that. He called people who passed a bill to interrogate women who had miscarriages barbaric. So clearly Ben is, using some classic tactics of his to shift the conversation. But the strength of this BBC reporter is not only does he have really good answers to what Ben says, but he also stays very focused. He's not going to get dragged into it as most people debating Ben Shapiro usually do. Again, Ben's strength is getting other people to look emotional and then looking calm in the face of their emotions, who undoubtedly steps out of line and says something that they don't mean or isn't precise, and then he's able to rip that apart instead of actually having a debate about principle or what's right. So the next thing that he gets into is that Shapiro says that he would vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden in 2020. This is fairly minor and not really that surprising. And obviously I'm not a Joe Biden supporter, but this argument is ridiculous that he's making, and it was so absurd that I had to stop to sit down on it for a second. He specifically says that the damage of Donald Trump is done and cannot be undone. The damage to the United States reputation specifically. This argument is incoherent. The logic that somehow our perception in the international sphere is like at a zero is already not true. It has been drastically decreased by Donald Trump, but to think that it's somehow irreparable is not the case. If that was the case, I think people would challenge our military might more than they do in the status quo. There would be more people stepping up to be international leaders, which to some degree is true, but it's pretty obvious that people expect the United States to return to normal. More of Donald Trump continuing to damage our relationships is not a good idea, and to try to describe it as a non-terminal impact is just ridiculous. And the next part is the real meat of the interview to me, and the reason I wanted to do this video, specifically because I think that Ben Shapiro, even as he walks out, is getting away with too much here. So Andrew Neil starts really ripping him apart by quoting Ben Shapiro's own book, and then Ben Shapiro's own tweets. Specifically, the one that I really want to talk about is what I see as Ben Shapiro's most morally reprehensible thing he's ever said, and that's that Israelis like to build and Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. So sometimes I defend Ben Shapiro. The thing I just said earlier about his strength is getting other people to look emotional. He most of the time is a pretty collected guy. He's fairly intelligent, even if I think he's not debating legitimately, like he's trying to change the lens of the conversation. I will defend Ben to people when he's not saying things like this. Not that I think he's right, but his right to have a platform and continue to speak. What's crazy is that he's trying so hard to swerve out of this, and the BBC's other criticisms of his old tweets by saying, well, I have this whole list of stupid things that I said. But what's funny about that is what is not on that list is this tweet. If you actually go to his website, and that's true right now, even after he tweeted out that he lost this debate against BBC and referenced this list of stupid things he said, he has it under the category of stuff that the left is taking out of context. That means he's not just outright apologizing for this. Actually, the opposite. He's not apologizing at all. He's just arguing that he's being taken out of context. So he somehow thinks that having this on the left takes us out of context list means that he's out of the range for it, that he shouldn't be attacked for it, and he's using this as a shield in spite of the fact that he hasn't apologized for it at all. I really want to sit down on it because the BBC reporter didn't have the chance to, and I want to pick apart that defense. So the initial tweet that he made is hashtagged with #settlements rock. So he's justifying not only Israel's right to exist, which I think is fairly unchallenged by just about everybody, but specifically he's defending the expansionist and genocidal Israel. That's Israel who goes into the West Bank, Israel who bombs ambulances, Israel who is essentially leaving Palestine with nothing, is just killing them and taking their ground. He tries to claim in the interview that, well, I clarified, I don't mean all Arabs. And the BBC reporter is awesome. He says, you're right, you clarified and said all Palestinians, which is really not any better. Shapiro keeps trying to make this other argument the BBC guy doesn't press him on, and he makes this on his website too, that was like, well, I clarified right away, or I guess he doesn't say I clarified right away, just I clarified that I didn't mean all Arabs, obviously, just people who are opposed to the Israeli regime. But his tweet specifically says Palestinians, and actually that clarification wasn't made until 2 hours later, which is a clear indication that backlash was already happening when he decided to clarify it, and now he acts like that was the initial thought, and not that the initial thought was just that Arabs live in sewage and bomb things. He's actually still trying to pivot out of, in this interview, not all Palestinians, but his website, the one I told you that he hasn't moved the Arab statement into the stupid things I said category, still says that the Palestinian population is fundamentally rotten to the core. So clearly, when I tell you that Ben Shapiro is down with Israeli genocide, I don't really think I'm making that big of a leap. I mean, he literally describes these people as less than people. And really quickly, I could do a whole video on this, but I'm going to try to give the quickest history I can of the Israeli-Palestine conflict of the last at least 20-something years. There's this really great read. It's like 20 pages. It's called The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism by Pape. I'll link it below. Uh, it shows very clearly, it's easy stuff to see, that there's a direct relationship between the Israeli invasion of the West Bank and terrorism. That's because terrorism is rational. Now, you're probably like, oh, this guy just said terrorism is rational. You lost me. I'm not paying any more attention to you. But if you went to college, it's really international politics 101. Forget if you didn't go to college, the word rational just means that people do things because there's a goal behind what they do. So people aren't just crazy. They're not just terrorists for the hell of it. Oftentimes, and for it to even be classified as terrorism, they have to be attempting to accomplish a political goal. So in 1993, Israel agreed to the Oslo Accords, and one component of that was that they were supposed to withdraw from the West Bank. The West Bank, for those of you who don't know, is generally considered Palestinian territory, but more and more settlements, the ones that Ben Shapiro thinks are awesome, have encroached on the territory of the Palestinians and are wiping out the remaining land that they have. So again, it's not just about Israel itself, but it's about the land that they are also taking. It's about colonization. It's about invasion, really. And obviously, violence is bad. But so is Israel annexing the West Bank. And so when you push a people to the brink, what do you think you're going to get? Israel literally bombs ambulances, they kill medics, they lay down bombs across civilian populations and encroach on Palestinian territory, dehumanize its people. When our media reports about this, they literally oftentimes don't even mention the Palestinian deaths because they're not even seen as people by our media or by Israel, certainly. And so it's clear that the maintenance of Israel isn't the goal, it's the crushing of Palestine. It's a really clear, simple bottom line that both deserve legitimate existence. I don't think that's a crazy stance, but saying that Palestine deserves to exist is heavily criticized in our media, and you get called anti Semitic for saying it. And this is the same guy who says that Jewish people who don't support the Israeli regime should turn their cards in. And the BBC interviewer gets him on that too. But what is the argument? That somehow support of a genocidal regime is part of being a good Jew? I don't think that there's any coherence to that argument at all. If anything, the attitude and the ongoing efforts of the Israel administration have shown a clear correlation, like I told you, with causing attacks to accomplish political goals, specifically that goal being getting Israeli people out of West Bank and getting them to stop attacking them. So really, Israel is resulting in more Jewish people being killed because of their ongoing genocidal administration. Now, of course, like both sides should probably stop. I'm not really defending Hamas, but I am pointing out to you that you can clearly see when Israel takes an action that Hamas responds. And so now we are where we are today. And if we want the violence to stop, we probably can't just keep blaming one side and saying that the actions of the other are clearly justified. Both are wrong, and there's a direct relationship between them. So the last bit is, of course, Shapiro can't defend himself. He walks off, and he tries to downplay his loss in a tweet. He admits to losing, which is nice, but it's really, I think it's just a way to kind of shrug off the fact that he got beat pretty bad, and that's a big deal for Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro's entire claim to fame is how good of a debater he is, and that he's unbeatable, and that nobody ever can destroy his facts and logic. The reality is, and the reason he's shaking this off, is that his positions are really indefensible. So he tries to blame it as, I'm not prepared, but it's literally a discussion about his material. It's his book and his tweets, and he's somehow not prepared for the debate. I really hope we get to see more of this. I hope this isn't the end of Ben Shapiro. I'm sure it's not, only because I look forward to the day when I get to beat Ben Shapiro myself. I think there's a lot more to pick him apart on. I'm really glad I got to see the BBC reporter do it. It's step one of many, and that's exactly the kind of thing we need. It's sad that it takes journalists from outside the United States to actually challenge people like this. Like I said, there's a lot of sheep. I'm happy to concede that. A lot of people on the left don't know how to defend their positions. But frankly, neither does Ben Shapiro. I will catch you all later today. I hope I'm going to try to make another video about the current ongoings of the Mueller investigation and why, once again, both parties are probably in the wrong. Have a fantastic rest of your Saturday.